In this episode, we turn to a part of artificial intelligence, AI, governance that becomes especially important once a system is live and interacting with the outside world, how an organization communicates about that system, and how it keeps the power to reduce, narrow, or stop its use when circumstances change. For a brand new learner, these two ideas may seem unrelated at first. One sounds like communication work, and the other sounds like technical or operational control. In reality, they belong together because both are about maintaining responsible authority over a deployed system after release. A live AI deployment does not exist only inside a technical environment. It also exists inside a human environment filled with customers, partners, regulators, employees, and affected individuals who may need explanations, updates, warnings, or reassurance. At the same time, the organization needs real controls that let it respond if the system becomes unsafe, unreliable, inappropriate for a specific setting, or too risky to keep running in the same way everywhere. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to understand external communication planning is to stop thinking of it as a public relations exercise and start thinking of it as a governance tool. When an organization deploys AI, it creates expectations in the minds of people who use its services, depend on its systems, or are affected by decisions touched by automation. Those people may need to know whether AI is involved, what role it plays, what limits exist, what human oversight remains in place, and what steps are available if they have concerns. Communication planning helps the organization answer those needs consistently instead of improvising under pressure. For a beginner, the key point is that silence is not neutral. If people cannot tell when AI is involved, or if they receive vague and inconsistent explanations when problems occur, trust begins to erode even before anyone proves that the system is technically weak. A mature organization plans communication in advance because clarity, timing, and accuracy matter greatly once a live deployment starts affecting real interactions and real expectations. External communication plans usually begin with audience awareness, because not every outside group needs the same information in the same format. Customers may need a plain explanation of how the system supports a service and what recourse exists if something seems wrong. Business partners may need clearer detail about data handling, system boundaries, and operational reliability if their work connects to the deployment. Regulators or oversight bodies may require formal records or specific categories of disclosure depending on the setting. The general public may need a broader explanation if the system becomes visible through public service, public controversy, or large-scale use. For a beginner, this is important because communication is not just about saying more. It is about giving the right people the information they need to understand the system at the level that matters to them. A plan helps the organization avoid two common mistakes at once: saying too little to support trust and accountability, or saying too much in an unstructured way that confuses people and weakens the credibility of the message. A strong communication plan also identifies what kinds of events will trigger external communication. Not every technical issue deserves public notice, but some events clearly do require outside communication because they affect service quality, safety, privacy, fairness, trust, or the rights and expectations of those interacting with the organization. A harmful output pattern, a serious incident, a major service interruption, a material change in system behavior, or a discovery that the system was used outside approved boundaries may all justify some form of external notice depending on the context. For a beginner, the important lesson is that communication should not depend only on embarrassment or media attention. A responsible organization decides in advance what kinds of developments merit communication so that it is not left debating basic obligations in the middle of an already stressful situation. This kind of preparation reduces delay, supports consistency, and helps leaders act from principle rather than from fear of criticism once the need to communicate becomes urgent. Timing matters just as much as content. If an organization waits too long to explain a material issue involving AI, People may assume it is hiding information or reacting only because it was forced to do so. If it communicates too early with unclear facts, it may spread confusion, overstate certainty, or commit to explanations that later turn out to be incomplete. That is why external communication planning should include both speed and discipline. The plan should identify who gathers facts, who approves outward messages, how preliminary information is labeled, and how updates will be issued as understanding improves. For a beginner, this is a valuable governance insight because it shows that communication is not separate from incident response. It is part of response. An organization may contain a technical problem quickly and still damage trust if its external message is late, evasive, contradictory, or careless. Good planning allows the organization to speak with enough speed to show responsibility and enough caution to avoid turning uncertainty into misinformation. The content of external communication should also be carefully governed. A strong message usually explains what happened or what is changing, what systems or services are affected, what the organization is doing in response, what affected people should do next if anything, and how additional updates will be provided. When AI is involved, the message may also need to explain the role the system played, the limits of that role, and whether human review or fallback processes remain available. For a beginner, the key point is that effective communication is honest without becoming reckless. It should not minimize meaningful risk, but it should also avoid speculation that goes beyond the evidence available at the moment. This is one reason planning matters so much. If teams have already considered what types of explanation may be needed, they are less likely to fall into empty reassurance on one side or confusing over-disclosure on the other. Well-planned communication helps people understand the situation, the impact, and the organization's posture without being forced to guess. Communication plans also need to address consistency across channels. If a customer hears one explanation from support staff, a different explanation through a public notice, and a third explanation through a partner update, the organization quickly loses credibility even if each message contains part of the truth. A responsible plan therefore connects legal, operational, technical, customer-facing, and leadership teams so they are working from the same facts and the same approved framing. This does not mean every audience receives identical wording. It means the messages align on the important points and do not contradict one another in ways that raise suspicion or confusion. For a beginner, this is a powerful reminder that governance lives in coordination as much as in policy. The organization must know who speaks, who reviews, who updates, and how one message relates to another. Without that coordination, external communication becomes fragmented, and fragmented communication can make a manageable issue feel like a loss of control even when the technical problem itself is being handled responsibly behind the scenes. Now we can turn to the second half of the topic, which is deactivation and localization controls. Deactivation means the organization has the practical ability to stop or suspend an AI system or a meaningful part of that system when continued use is no longer acceptable. Localization controls mean the organization can narrow or contain the deployment so it operates only in certain regions, settings, business units, user groups, data environments, or functions rather than running at full scope everywhere at once. For a beginner, these controls matter because responsible governance requires more than the power to launch. It also requires the power to slow down, scale back, or stop. If the only choices are full operation or total collapse, the organization may hesitate too long before acting because shutdown feels too disruptive. Good control design creates more options than that. It allows leaders to contain risk proportionately, which is often the difference between a controlled response and an avoidable crisis. Deactivation controls are essential because no organization should depend on a deployed AI system without a believable way to turn it off when necessary. A model may begin producing unsafe outputs, a data source may become corrupted, a vendor service may fail, a regulatory condition may change, or an internal investigation may reveal that the system is being used in ways not originally approved. In those moments, governance depends on the ability to interrupt use quickly enough to prevent further harm. For a beginner, the practical lesson is simple. A system is not fully governed if it cannot be stopped. It is not enough to say people can simply avoid using it, because in real workflows tools often become embedded in interfaces, routines, and expectations that push people toward continued use unless stronger action is taken. Deactivation controls create the organizational equivalent of an emergency brake. They make it possible to protect users, customers, and affected individuals when confidence in the system no longer justifies business as usual. Good deactivation controls should be both technical and operational. The technical side may include kill switches, access revocation, feature toggles, routing changes, or service disablement that can be executed quickly and reliably. The operational side includes authority, process, and communication. Someone must know who can trigger deactivation, under what conditions, with what documentation, and how that decision will be communicated to internal teams and external stakeholders if necessary. For a beginner, this is one of the clearest examples of governance in action. A control that exists in theory but cannot be used quickly, or that requires unclear approval from too many people during an emergency, is weaker than it appears. Real control means the organization can recognize a need, make a decision, execute that decision, and manage the consequences without dangerous delay. That is why deactivation planning should happen before launch and be revisited after major changes. In a crisis, organizations rarely invent better control than the control they already built. Localization controls are equally valuable because risk is often uneven. A system may be appropriate in one geography, but not another because of language, law, culture, infrastructure, or data quality differences. It may be suitable for one product line, business unit, or customer segment, but not for a more sensitive area. It may be stable for internal assistance, yet too risky for public-facing use. Localization controls allow the organization to tailor the deployment instead of forcing one uniform operating model across every environment. For a beginner, this matters because responsible governance is often about proportionality. Not every concern requires full shutdown. Sometimes the right response is to restrict the deployment to settings where the organization understands the data better, where human oversight is stronger, or where the consequences of error are easier to contain. Localization is therefore a control of precision. It allows the organization to preserve useful value where conditions support it while containing exposure where the fit is weaker. Localization can take several forms in practice. It may mean turning off the system in one country while keeping it available in another. It may mean disabling certain features for specific users, limiting which data sources can be accessed in certain workflows, narrowing the tool to one language, or preventing one team from using the system for a class of cases deemed too sensitive. It can also mean routing only low-risk tasks through the AI while reserving higher-risk tasks for human handling. For a beginner, the central lesson is that localization is not only about geography. It is about bounded deployment. The organization asks where this system can be used responsibly and where it cannot, then builds controls to reflect that answer. This approach helps prevent the common mistake of treating deployment as all or nothing. A system can remain useful while still being narrowed meaningfully, and that narrowing may be exactly what keeps the deployment defensible as evidence, regulation, or business conditions change over time. External communication and deactivation or localization controls come together most clearly during incidents or high-risk changes. If the organization discovers a harmful pattern, it may need to tell affected users what happened while also deactivating the relevant function or localizing the system to safer conditions. If regulations change in one jurisdiction, it may need to localize the service there and communicate the change to partners or customers. If a vendor update creates uncertainty, it may need to suspend public-facing use while explaining that the service has been narrowed as a precaution. For a beginner, this connection is important because it shows that communication without control is weak, and control without communication is also weak. External audiences need to know not only that the organization is aware of the problem, but also that it has concrete means of reducing harm. Internal teams need to know not only that use is changing, but why it is changing and what to do next. Mature governance links the message to the action and the action to the message. Another important point is that these controls support trust precisely because they show humility. An organization that plans only for successful operation may appear confident, but it is not necessarily responsible. An organization that plans for communication, deactivation, and localization is showing that it understands the limits of prediction and the need to adapt when reality turns out differently than expected. For a beginner, this is one of the deepest lessons in AI governance. Responsible deployment does not come from assuming the system will always behave as intended. It comes from building the ability to explain, constrain, and if necessary stop the system when conditions change. That kind of humility is not weakness. It is a form of operational strength because it keeps the organization from becoming trapped by its own earlier enthusiasm. It also reassures outside audiences that the organization has thought seriously about what happens when the deployment no longer fits the conditions under which it was first approved. A simple example helps tie the topic together. Imagine an organization deploys an AI assistant for customer support across several regions. Over time, it notices that the assistant performs well in one language and service line, but produces more confusing answers in another region where policy rules differ and the training examples are weaker. A strong external communication plan would help the organization explain any service adjustment clearly to affected customers and partners instead of pretending nothing changed. Strong localization controls would allow it to narrow the assistant to the better-performing region and pause or reduce features in the weaker one while improvements are made. If a more serious issue surfaced, deactivation controls would make it possible to suspend use quickly rather than letting the weak deployment continue, because no practical break existed. For a beginner, the lesson is that responsible governance is not proved only by launch success. It is also proved by whether the organization can communicate honestly and act decisively when the live environment reveals that different conditions demand a different deployment posture. As we close, the central lesson is that external communication plans and deactivation or localization controls are essential parts of governing AI after deployment. Communication plans help the organization explain what the system does, what changes are happening, what incidents have occurred, and what affected people should understand or do next. Deactivation controls ensure the organization can stop use when continued operation is no longer acceptable. Localization controls allow it to narrow the deployment to safer regions, use cases, user groups, or functions instead of relying only on total shutdown or unchecked continuation. For a new learner, these ideas belong together because they support the same goal: keeping the organization in responsible control of a live system whose effects reach beyond engineering and into the real world. A mature AI program does not simply hope everything will remain fine everywhere all the time. It prepares to explain, contain, and if necessary halt the system in ways that remain clear, proportionate, and defensible when trust matters most.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.